For most Americans, Brazil was once seen as a country of enormous promise. Vast natural resources, a young population, industrial capacity, energy independence, agriculture capable of feeding the world. For decades, Brazil was called the country of the future. But today, many outside observers ask a disturbing question. How did Brazil, a nation with so much potential, become hostage to a socialist and quasi-communist political culture that seems impossible to escape? This did not happen overnight, and it did not happen by force. It happened slowly, legally, culturally, and economically. And that is what makes it dangerous, not only for Brazil, but as a lesson for the rest of the world. To understand Brazil's path, you must first understand that modern communism rarely arrives through revolution anymore. It arrives through institutions, through language, through education, through dependency, through the promise of protection. Brazil's story begins in the mid-20th century, during a period of rapid industrialization and state expansion. Like many developing countries, Brazil believed that the state could accelerate progress by directing the economy. Protectionism, state-owned companies, centralized planning, and heavy regulation became the norm. This model promised national sovereignty and social justice, but it planted a dangerous seed: the idea that prosperity comes from the state, not from productivity. By the 1960s and 1970s, Brazil lived under a military regime. While not communist, this period deeply centralized power and expanded state control over key industries. Large public companies were created, bureaucracy grew, economic decisions became political decisions. When the military regime ended, the institutional structure remained, and it was inherited by the left. This is a crucial point. Brazil did not transition from free markets to socialism. It transitioned from state-controlled authoritarianism to state-controlled democracy. The size of the state was never questioned. Only who would control it? In the 1980s, Brazil faced hyperinflation, debt crises, and economic collapse. Instead of learning that excessive state control had failed, the political class concluded that the problem was inequality. This narrative became the moral foundation of Brazilian socialism. Poverty was not seen as a consequence of low productivity or bad policy, but as proof of exploitation. This framing is powerful. Once inequality becomes the central moral issue, any policy can be justified in its name. The 1988 Constitution marked a turning point. Written with strong left-wing influence, it expanded social rights dramatically: healthcare, education, pensions, labor protections, without a corresponding discussion about productivity or fiscal sustainability. The Constitution promised European-style welfare without European-level productivity. From that moment on, the Brazilian state became legally obligated to grow forever. Taxes increased, regulations multiplied, labor laws became rigid, entrepreneurship became risky, informality exploded, dependency expanded, and every economic problem created by these policies was blamed on capitalism itself. During the 1990s, Brazil flirted with market reforms, privatization, and monetary discipline. Inflation was stabilized. Growth returned briefly. But the cultural foundation had already shifted. The idea that the state should provide, protect, and redistribute had become dominant in universities, media, and public discourse. This is where ideological capture matters. Brazilian universities became centers of Marxist and neo-Marxist thought. Economics departments taught structuralism and dependency theory. Capitalism was framed as foreign exploitation. The private sector was portrayed as immoral. Entrepreneurs were seen as oppressors. These ideas shaped generations of journalists, teachers, judges, and politicians. By the time left-wing parties gained power in the early 2000s, the battlefield was already prepared. The Workers' Party did not seize power, it inherited it. Commodity booms masked structural decay. High global demand for Brazilian exports generated revenue. Social programs expanded. Millions received direct transfers. Poverty indicators improved temporarily. And the narrative was cemented. Socialism works. Capitalism failed. But this was illusion, not transformation. The state grew larger, public debt expanded, corruption became systemic, productive investment stagnated, education quality declined, infrastructure lagged. When the commodity cycle ended, the weaknesses were exposed. Brazil entered recession, fiscal crisis, and political chaos. Still, the ideology survived. Why? Because dependency creates loyalty. When large portions of the population depend directly or indirectly on the state, pensions, subsidies, public jobs, regulated credit, reform becomes politically toxic. Any attempt to reduce state power is framed as cruelty. Any market reform is labeled neoliberalism. Any fiscal responsibility is called austerity against the poor. The judiciary reinforced this system. Courts expanded their power. Judges became political actors. Law became a tool for social engineering. The rule of law slowly gave way to rule by interpretation. The media followed. Economic reality was replaced by moral narratives. Inflation was blamed on greed. Fiscal deficits were blamed on lack of compassion. Failure was always external, never systemic. At this point, Brazil became hostage not to tanks or revolutions, but to ideas. Ideas that reject merit, ideas that distrust markets, ideas that equate equality with justice, ideas that believe the state knows better than society. This is why many Brazilians feel trapped. Elections change faces, not structures. Power rotates, but the system remains. The state consumes nearly everything. Taxes punish productivity. Inflation erodes savings. Capital flees. Talent emigrates. Communism in Brazil does not look like Soviet flags or 5-year plans. It looks like permanent dependency, moralized economics, and institutional paralysis. And this is the warning for Americans. Brazil shows that you do not need to abolish private property to destroy incentives. You only need to regulate, tax, and moralize it until it stops functioning. You do not need to ban free speech. You only need to delegitimize dissent. You do not need a revolution, you only need time. Brazil became hostage because it never confronted the size and role of the state. It replaced responsibility with entitlement, productivity with redistribution, reality with ideology. And once a society internalizes those beliefs, escape becomes extremely difficult. Brazil is not poor because it tried capitalism. Brazil struggles because it never truly allowed it. That is how a country with everything became hostage to an idea that promises justice and delivers stagnation.